Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Baldur's Gate 3. Today, in my class guides video, we're going to go over the Warlock. So, I didn't mean to zoom in that far to her. The Warlock is bound by a pact to an all-powerful patron. Warlocks trade their loyalty for supernatural abilities and unique magic. So, similar to a patron, but rather than, similar to a paladin or a cleric, but instead of swearing your allegiance to a god, you're swearing your allegiance to something that is potentially comparable in power, but it's more of a trade. You do something for them, they'll do something for you, i.e. give you power. There are currently two subclasses in the game. We have the Fiend and the Great Old One. So the Fiend is a fiend, so a devil or a demon. Warlocks in service to fiends work towards corrupting destructive ends, intentionally or otherwise, and receive hellish blessings in return. So, obviously, if you're serving a devil, for instance, they're going to try and manipulate you to do evil things for their own ends. Whether or not you want to or not, you don't have to be evil to be a warlock of a fiend, but they try to push you towards evil nonetheless. And we have the Great Old One. Warlocks bound to eldritch beings in the far realms work towards inscrutable goals, gaining strange powers over entropy and the mind. So, the best way I can describe Great Old Ones, Cthulhu. It's pretty much the easiest way to describe it. It's simply, if you're familiar with kind of Lovecraftian horror, the Great Old Ones are the embodiment, and honestly D&D just ripped it straight off Lovecraft, but it's the idea of his, like, disgusting outer world beings that are inscrutable to the human mind. So this here, work towards inscrutable goals. You're working towards some kind of goal that they may have for you, but that goal may be completely nonsensical to any kind of human being looking at it. But the only real difference you get between those two, at least in early access, is a different list of spells. There is a boon you get with each of them. However, currently, the Great Old One doesn't actually have that boon. If we go to the Fiend, you can see down here we get Dark One's Blessing. When we reduce to hostile creatures to 0 hit points, this gift from your patron grants you Charisma modifier plus your level of hit points. So you heal when you kill things. As long as you're doing the final blow, you will heal. It's quite nice. Ordinarily, there should be one for the Great Old One as well. It has a comparable skill. The skill that the Great Old One usually gets in tabletop D&D is that they can have telepathy, so they can communicate telepathically with people within like 30 feet of them. That's not implemented in the game yet. To be fair, it sounds like a very difficult thing to implement into a video game context, but currently they have no replacement for it. I assume there will be one coming, but as of yet, there isn't. As I said, the only difference really is the spells that you get. On the Great Old One, you get Dissonant Whispers as well as Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I'll go through all of the spells in a second, but Dissonant Whispers whisper a discordant melody to a creature. It takes 3d6 psychic damage and becomes frightened. Frightened is a somewhat cool status condition. They'll run away from you and try and get away as much as they can. And then we have Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which is a fantastic spell. Inflict a creature with fits of laughter, leaving it prone and incapacitated. It just can't do anything because it's laughing so hard. It's interesting. The idea being that you invoke madness. And the Fiend instead gets Burning Hands, very on-brand, being able to cast fire magic. As well as here, it gets the Command Halt spell as well. So they're the ones that get swapped out. But what you get always as a Warlock is Armor of Agathis, fantastic spell. A Spectral Frost covers you, gain 5 temporary hit points, and deal 5 cold damage to any creature that hits you with a melee attack. Now this is nice, but it also scales off level, which we'll get to with the Warlock, because the Warlock has an interesting way that they cast spells. But at higher levels, it adds 5 every time. So at a second level spell, this gets 10 temporary hit points, and you deal 10 cold damage to any creature that hits you with a melee attack. It's fantastic. There's also Arms of Hadar. You call forth tendrils of dark energy, targets take 2d6 necrotic damage and can't take reactions. The idea of not taking reactions is quite good if you don't want to be next to someone and you've got a big melee fighter next to you. You can use Arms of Hadar and then run away, and then we'll get an attack of opportunity, which is fantastic. Burning Hands, just fire damage in a big cone in front of you. Charm Person, you can magically charm a humanoid. They'll become friendly to you is probably not the correct word, but they won't attack you. They'll see you as an ally on a battlefield. However, this doesn't work with your teammates, so if I were to charm an enemy, they won't attack me, but they might attack Asterion, who's standing next to me. Which is weird. I feel like that should be buffed so that they just are on your team, effectively. But anyway. Command Halt, you just make someone stop. It's a fantastic spell. Expeditious Retreat, you can turn your dash action into a bonus action rather than an action, so you can be very, very fast. Hellish Rebuke, the next time you take damage, use your reaction to surround your attacker in Hellish Flames that deal 2d10 fire damage. Very cool spell. You can use that kind of preemptively, so that next time you get attacked, you do a bunch of damage. Hex, bread and butter of a Warlock, in my opinion. Curse a creature to deal an additional 1d6 necrotic damage whenever you hit them with an attack. The creature also has disadvantage on ability checks for one ability of your choosing. Worth noting here, a lot of people get confused with this. This is ability checks, specifically, not saving throws. If it was saving throws, it would be an overpowered spell. It would not be a first level spell. But ability checks, so the difference being, if you cast a spell on someone, like Arms of Vidar for instance, they have to make a strength saving throw. That's not affected by Hex. They don't get disadvantage on the saving throw, they just get disadvantage on a check. So, very unlikely to happen during a fight, in all honesty. You don't do many ability checks during a fight, it's usually saving throws. That's why it's a bit misleading though, and people get confused with that. Next we have Protection from Good and Evil. You can't be charmed, frightened, or possessed by any aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, or fiends. Or undead. And then we have Witch Bolt, which is just a lightning damage attack. The one thing noting here, that once you actually hit with Witch Bolt, you stay connected, so you can just activate it to auto-hit on your next turn. I'm just going to take Armor of Agathis and Hex. But we can also go through the cantrips that you get. Cantrips are level 0 spells, you can cast them as much as you like, there's no spell slots for them. But you have a choice of Blade Ward. You gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapon attacks, so you take half damage from weapon attacks, quite useful. Chill Touch, it's a ranged necromancy spell, it does 1d8 necrotic damage, and they can't heal, which is the effect that most necromancy spells have. If you do necrotic damage, they can't heal hit points. It's a cool effect. Eldritch Blast. Now, I was talking about how Hex is bread and butter of a Warlock. Eldritch Blast is bread and butter of a Warlock. The kind of stereotype being that all the Warlock will do is cast Eldritch Blast because it's such a good cantrip. Which it is, to be fair. Conjure a Beam of Crackling Energy that deals 1d10 force damage. That doesn't sound amazing. I mean, it's a relatively high amount of damage for a cantrip. You can see here Chill Touch does 1d8. So it's slightly more damage on average. But, as we'll see when we level up, there's quite a few ways that you can buff Eldritch Blast to make it even more powerful. And a high-level Warlock doing Eldritch Blast is going to do more damage than a lot of other spells they have. It's kind of ludicrous. But moving on, you have Friends. You can enchant a non-hull style creature to gain advantage on charisma checks. Mage Hand, so you can create a sort of spectral hand that'll do things for you. Minor Illusion, create an illusionary image that distracts nearby creatures, compelling them to investigate it. Poison Spray, you project a noxious puff of gas that just does poison damage. And True Strike, divine a creature's defenses to give you advantage on attack rolls against it. Useless, never take True Strike. But as you can see here, Poison Spray does a bit more damage, but it has a range of 10 feet, whereas this has a range of 60 feet. Eldritch Blast is kind of insane. As for cantrips you can take, I think Blade Ward and Eldritch Blast is not a bad combination for a Warlock. That's what it gives you off default, and I would say it's probably the best choice to begin with. But moving down, we get spell slots. You gain Warlock spell slots to recharge on short rest. These spell slots are always at the highest available level. So, what this means is most classes, in fact every class other than the Warlock, they gain their spell slots after a long rest. So after you take a long rest, you'll get your spell slots back. Warlocks have very few spell slots comparatively. They don't get many spell slots whatsoever, but they regain all of their spell slots after a short rest. So you don't have to go to camp and go to sleep, you can just hit the short rest button and all your spells come back. Very, very useful. They have proficiency with wisdom saving throws and charisma saving throws. I forgot to go over the most important part of Warlock spells. You have spell slots, and those spell slots are always going to be at the highest level you can cast spells. So, if you are a level 4 Warlock, for instance, your spell slot is a second level spell slot, which means every spell you cast is at second level. You can't undercast a spell. You can't, even if you have a first level spell, when you cast it, it's a second level spell. What this means is it's always beneficial as a Warlock to pick spells that scale up when you cast them at higher spell levels, because they're going to be more efficient. But as I said, proficiency with wisdom saving throw and charisma saving throw. You get light armor proficiency as well as proficiency with simple weapons. And I think I'm going to go with the Fiend here. As I said, Fiend gets this extra benefit, which currently the Great Old One has nothing to replace. So strictly speaking, the Fiend is slightly better at the moment. However, when they come out with a subclass feature for the Great Old One, when they figure out what they're going to do, it very well may just even out to be perfectly natural. As for your race choice, Tiefling, fantastic choice here. That's what I've gone with. 2 Charisma and +1 into Intelligence. The Intelligence is kind of irrelevant, but the Charisma is quite nice. You also get the Thaumaturgy cantrip, just off the bat. It's worth noting you can do the different variation of Tiefling to change your cantrip, but I think Asmodeus is probably cooler, because Asmodeus is awesome. Other notable choices here, a Half-Elf is actually probably, strictly speaking, the better choice, because you get +2 into Charisma, and then you get to choose 2 other skills to put your points into, which is just better than 2 in Charisma and 1 in Intelligence. The benefit Tieflings get is fire resistance, which is fantastic. So that's a thing, I suppose. But the Half-Elf is just probably the strongest class that you can choose, to be perfectly honest. It's pretty ridiculous. Having said that, Tiefling, great choice. Drow, great. Half-Elf, great choice. Drow, pretty good choice as well, if you're +1 into Charisma and 2 into Dexterity. So that's relatively useful as well. They're the main ones I would say for Warlock. Anything that gives you Charisma, because as you can see here, Bards, Paladins, Sorcerers, and Warlocks use their Charisma as their spellcasting ability, and the likelihood the spells will land. So, your Charisma is very, very important. Speaking of which, let's go on to the ability scores. So this is what I would suggest, at least vaguely, you build for. Specifically, get to 16 Charisma. Once again, you can get to 17 Charisma, but that modifier doesn't go up to a +4, it stays at a +3, so 16 is actually more optimally where you want to be. Intelligence doesn't really matter. I don't like that being negative because of all of these checks that are associated with intelligence. Wisdom, again, I like to have at least +1, just so we can have some perception and some insight. Constitution, you probably want a relatively high Constitution at least a +2 modifier, simply because Warlocks, yes, they're spellcasters, but a lot of the time they will draw aggro. A lot of enemies will attack your Warlock because you're not going to be in great positioning. You need like direct line of sight a lot of the time. So having more health is usually a good idea. And Dexterity is just nice, mainly for your armor class, I'll be perfectly honest. It is worth noting that you could take your Dexterity higher and take your Constitution down to give you a slightly higher armor class. But I think, strictly speaking, 14-14 for Dexterity Con is pretty good split for a Warlock. Tends to be how I usually build them. And Strength doesn't really matter here. Honestly, Dexterity doesn't matter all that much either as far as your attacking stat. The main reason we're going into Dexterity is for our armor class. Because while a Warlock can use weapons, like there's nothing stopping Warlocks using weapons. They have proficiency in all simple weapons, so they can use any simple weapon they like. They can use maces, they can use daggers, they can use short swords, I believe, are simple weapons. So they can use weapons. There's no problem with them using weapons. It's just the problem becomes, why aren't I just using a spell that does more damage? Their class kind of is a hybrid class, but in reality, they're just a spellcasting class. But that's pretty much it, so we can move on to the level ups. Alright, here we are for level 2 level up. So we gain some hit points as always. We gain 1 spell, which is nice. We also gain 1 spell slot, which is also nice, so we can cast 2 spells now rather than 1, which is quite nice. And we get our Eldritch Invocations, so you can choose 2 of these. I will give my recommendation, but first things first, let's go through all of them. Starting with Agonizing Blast. When you cast Eldritch Blast, add your Charisma modifier to the damage it deals, unless it is negative. Armor of Shadows. You can cast Mage Armor on yourself at will without expending a spell slot. Beast Speech. You can cast Speak with Animals at will without expending a spell slot. Beguiling Influence. You invoke your patron's Bewitching Charm. You gain proficiency in the Deception and Persuasion skill. Devil's Sight. You can see normally in darkness, both magical and non-magical, to a distance of 60 feet. Fiendish Figure. You can cast False Life on yourself at will as a first level spell, without expending a spell slot. Mask of Many Faces. You can disguise yourself at will without expending a spell slot. Repelling Blast. When you hit a creature with Eldritch Blast, you can push the creature up to 15 feet away from you. And the Thief of 5 Fates. Once per long rest, you can cast Bane using a Warlock spell slot. So, the way that these work, I always find that things that use your spell slot usually aren't worth it. You see here, you can cast Bane using a Warlock spell slot. Using one of your very limited spell slots to cast Bane, I mean, Bane is a good spell, but it's not worth a Warlock spell slot spell, in my opinion. The ones that you can do without casting a spell, or without expending a spell slot, you see, like, False Life. Free False Life is cool. That's awesome spell. Where we got? Speak with animals without expending a spell slot. Cool, it's like utility. Armor of Shadows, Mage Armor, very good. If you decide you don't want to wear armor, you want to wear robes instead. Armor of Shadows, fantastic choice. However, my suggestion is to stick with light armor, so you don't need Armor of Shadows. Agonizing Blast, 100% take. It's worth noting, you can build a Warlock without Eldritch Blast. It's just definitely not optimal. As you can see here, there's definitely ways to buff it, and there's more ways to buff it as you get higher levels. So Eldritch Blast, extra damage on Eldritch Blast. So for my character, we have a +3 modifier in our Charisma. As you can see there, we have 16 Charisma, which is a +3 modifier. So this takes Eldritch Blast from a 1d10, so 1 to 10 damage, up to 4 to 13 damage. So the minimum damage we can do is now 4, which is great. It's just such a good invocation. I would take Agonizing Blast 100% of the time. If you are playing a creature that does not have Dark Vision, Devil's Sight is a very good option. You can see normally in darkness, both magical and non-magical. There is a benefit to taking this even if you have Dark Vision, simply because Devil's Sight will allow you to see even in magical darkness. So if someone uses the darkness spell, you can see right through it as if it's not there. Having said that, I'm pretty sure that Devil's Sight is currently not working. So keep that in mind. I'm pretty sure Devil's Sight is currently broken and not working properly. I could be wrong, but as far as I can tell, doesn't seem to be working. Other good choices here. False Life is nice, but pretty quickly becomes outclassed. Particularly if you take the... Well, I can't do it here. Where can I show you? In here. Particularly if you have Armor of Agathis, because they don't stack. You can't give yourself False Life and Armor of Agathis, you can only do one or the other. They'll override each other. You can't stack temporary hit points, you only override with whatever is the highest. So if you have Armor of Agathis, it's just a better version of False Life. So, generally not a great choice. Mask of Many Faces is really cool, but as of yet in the game, there isn't a whole use of... There's not a whole... many uses for disguising yourself. When the full game releases, I imagine there will be more, so this will be potentially more useful. Thief of 5 Fates is quite nice. Bane is good, but as I said, you don't want to expend a spell slot for it. Repelling Blast is where we want. When you hit a creature with Eldritch Blast, you can push them up to 15 feet away from you. So, you can cast Eldritch Blast, which is a 60-foot spell. You do additional damage with it, and you blast people backwards. It's fantastic. We can also get an extra spell here. My suggestion, again, would be something that scales with spell level. So Witch Bolt is definitely a good choice here, just to get some good range damage. Having said that, 2d12 versus... because you'll be casting it at 2nd level relatively soon. So 2d12, I mean, it's better damage than Eldritch Blast, for sure. Yeah, it's arguable. The argument here, obviously, is that maybe you want to take spells in your spell slots that aren't necessarily damaging spells, because a lot of the time Eldritch Blast is going to have more utility. But honestly, Witch Bolt is a very good spell, so we're going to go with Witch Bolt. I don't need to replace any spells, so that's going to be it. So Agonizing Blast, Repelling Blast is my suggestion, particularly if you're going with this Eldritch Blast kind of build. And then I started blasting. But, again, a lot of these are pretty good. I just love Agonizing Blast and I love Repelling Blast, they're fantastic. Alright, see you in the next level. Alright everybody, and for level 3 level up. Once again, more hit points. Warlock spells, you go up a level, so all of our spells are now level 2. We get a Pact Boon, however there currently is only one choice, which is Pact of the Chain. So we gain a Familiar, which is a Fey Spirit that takes form you choose. This can be an animal, imp, or a quasit. I'll go over that in a second. I'll actually go into game and show you what that does. We get our second level spell. Misty Step is a very good choice here, just because you can jump around and move and reposition. I would also choose a Scorching Ray, fantastic. Shatter, also fantastic, just because these two spells do a lot of damage. They can kick out huge numbers in damage, and they're quite good. But I'll go over the other spells you can choose from. We have Blindness. You can magically blind an enemy or a creature. Blinded creatures can try to shake off the effect at the end of each of their turns. Darkness, you create a cloud of magical darkness, which will heavily obscure an area and blind everything inside it. When they're blinded, they can't make any range attacks into or outside of the darkness, so that it just stops all range attacks, which is quite useful. Hold Person, it just incapacitates a creature effectively. It's quite useful, it paralyzes them. Invisibility, turn yourself or someone you touch invisible. Quite useful. It's a very useful ability. You can sneak past all the things by doing this. Mirror Image makes it harder for you to be hit. Also quite a good choice. The one problem that Mirror Image has is that it doesn't really scale up very well. So the fact that you're going to have higher spell levels later is kind of irrelevant. The same thing can be said with Misty Step. Scaling up the spell level doesn't actually affect Misty Step in any way. However, I would say it's useful enough that it doesn't really matter. And then we have Rave Enfeeblement, a beam of enervating?
Enervating.
Energy springs from your fingers. The target deals half damage with weapon attacks using strength. So effectively you just make them very, very weak, which is useful, but I wouldn't waste a spell slot on a Warlock for it. So as I said, Misty Step, Scorching Ray, or Shatter. I actually really like the Shatter spell. It's a relatively small area of effect, but it is an area of effect spell that can do a lot of damage, so I really like Shatter. Alright, and back to the chain, we can get a Servant, as I will show you right now. So what this does mechanically, it gives you the Find Familiar spell. You see here, Find Familiar, Conjuration spell. We can cast this. Now, you can get all the normal familiars, so you can get a spider, a raven, a rat, a frog, a crab, or a cat. So they're the normal familiars you can get. However, because we are a warlock, we also get the chance of a quasit, which is a little demon. That's what a quasit is. You can see this little guy here. He's a little demon. He can become invisible. He also has a claw attack that does 2d4 slashing damage, and he can also scare a bunch of enemies, or attempt to scare a bunch of enemies in an area, which is quite cool. He also has a relatively large jump. He's cool, the scare is nice. However, I would say that in 9 times out of 10, the Imp Familiar is actually probably going to be better. So the Imp is very similar to a Quasit, except it is a devil rather than a demon. So it is a lawful evil character rather than a chaotic evil character. Now, the difference is here. Claw attacks, same, it does slightly less damage, it wants 1d4 rather than 2d4. Once again, it can turn invisible, just at will, so you can have an invisible character to scout out for you. It has a sting, so the sting attack, you do 1d4 plus 3 piercing damage, and potentially does an additional d6 poison damage. It's a saving throw, a constitution saving throw to see whether they do it. However, the imp can fly. So, that's a thing. Interesting. And it didn't used to break invisibility. It does now break invisibility. That's interesting. Yeah, fly used to not actually take an action. It now takes an action. Interesting. The imp isn't quite as good as it used to be. It used to be broken, busted, super good. However, it's still fantastic. It is possibly one of the best scouts in the game. At-will invisibility for both the imp and the quasit. It's fantastic. You can fly around. And there's infinite range on these familiars as well. You can scout out a whole area. Like I can come all the way down here. I can send my imp over here. And he'll just make his way over there. So for scouting purposes, and also he's invisible and he's flying, so nothing can hear him, nothing can see him. I'm pretty sure I can just go past these guys, they're not even going to notice. Yep, see. I can just go where I want. The Outlander serves Zevlor. Remove all intruders. Force them out if you must.
Father, I pray this path is right.
I just gotta summon another one. I'm just intrigued to see what happened, to be perfectly honest. These guys chasing out the all the intruders must leave. Are they coming to talk to me? Is that what happened? I think I broke the game.
Sylvanus, steady my hands.
Huh. Well, I started a ruckus. Anyway, let's move on to level 4, shall we? I've never done that before. Apparently, you could start a civil war by well, not a civil war, but you could start a rather large conflict. There we go. Now we're in combat. Yeah, it didn't really know what to do there. It's kind of hilarious. Alright, I'll see you at level 4, guys. Oh, this game, I love it. Alright, everybody. On to level 4 and the choice of feat. The obvious one here is ability score improvement and bumping your charisma. The extra 2 points into charisma, if you started off as I suggested at 16, will get you to 18 charisma. And 18 charisma gives you a +4 modifier, which bumps your damage up with Eldritch Blast, which is fantastic. Makes you even better in conversations, which is really, really good as well. A lot of good things for just bumping charisma, and arguably probably the best choice, honestly, is just ability score improvement. Other good choices though is tough. Get additional HP, really, really good. 2 HP per level, so an additional 8 HP when you take this feat at level 4. The other suggestion I have is to grab moderately armored. This gives you proficiency with medium armor and shields, and you increase your strength or dex score by 1 to a maximum of 20. The increase in strength and dex, whatever. I would put it into dexterity, by the way. Just chuck one into dexterity, why not? But being able to wear medium armor and having a shield will usually give you a better AC than just wearing light armor with no shield. And because you don't really need to use weapons, having a shield is usually a pretty good option on a Warlock, simply because upping that AC is just a great choice. Not a whole lot of options I would suggest here. As I said, these 3 are pretty much the only ones. Probably ability score improvement, and if you want to grab that shield, moderately armored is a really, really good choice as well. And tough is a good choice on pretty much everyone. Everyone is going to have the suggestion, yeah, tough. If you want HP, tough's a good choice. However, moderately armored is pretty good mainly for the shield. Medium armor and shield, fantastic. And ability score improvement in your charisma is hard to pass up as well, because that +4 modifier is really, really helpful. It pushes up Eldritch Blast damage, notably. That extra +1 is great. Because you're adding +1 to your minimum damage as well. So it makes, at that point, your Eldritch Blast is minimum doing 5 damage. That's fantastic. There's a lot of times where doing a minimum of 5 damage is just great. You know, oh, I can definitely kill this guy, hit him with Eldritch Blast, even if I roll the worst possible roll I can get, he dies. That's a really cool ability to be able to do. So yeah, charisma, great choice. Armor, medium armor and shields, also a fantastic choice. And tough if you just like HP. Alright, moving on now to equipment. Alright, now onto some notable early game items. I've realized that a lot of these videos I'm doing effectively the same items in each of them, notably Crusher's Rings and the Gloves of Power, because they're both amazing. Crusher's Ring you can get from a goblin in the goblin camp called Crusher. There's 100 different ways you can get this ring, he has it on his toe. Interact with him, you'll find a way to get the ring. It's very, very easy to get the ring, it's hard not to. If you fail every single way, he'll go, I need to go take a piss. Then you just follow him, kill him, take the ring. Or pickpocket the ring, I think you can pickpocket it off him too. So, Crusher's Ring gives you extra movement. Fantastic on any class for any reason. Extra movement is always good. The Gloves of Power, as long as you have the Blessing from Priestess Gut, once again in the Goblin Camp, if you go to the Goblin Camp, she'll bless you with the Mark of the Absolute. As long as you have that mark, these will give you Bane on any creature you hit with an attack. Which is great. And it's notable there that this is attack, which means it does work with any spell attack. So Eldritch Blast does affect this, so you can hit Bane on any creature you hit with Eldritch Blast, which is fantastic. And the only other notable kind of early-ish game item is the Studded Leather Armor +1. It is the best light armor you can get in the game. Gives you 13 AC plus your Dexterity modifier. So for usually going to be a +2 or a +3 depending on how you build your Warlock. On my case it'll be a +2, so that's 15 AC on light armor. That's very, very good. You get this from the Zentarum hideout. I won't go much more into it than that. There is a merchant named Brem who will sell to. If you know where the Zentarum hideout is, fantastic. If not, you're going to have to look it up, because spoilers, that's a few quests that kind of converge there. So it's an interesting place, so I don't want to spoil it here necessarily. But in the Zentarum hideout, there is a merchant who will sell you this armor, and it is very, very good armor. That's pretty much for the items. And as I said, I didn't bother going through and actually showing you where everything is specifically, because I've realized I'm doing this for every single video in this class guide series. I'm going, get Crusher's Ring, get the Gloves of Power. So I'm not going to go over how to get them every single video now. I'm just going to have, these are the items you should have. If there's anything particularly notable, I'll point it out, but I think it's easier to do it in this format rather than going through the actual gameplay and showing you in the game. But I think that's about it. So, if you like this video, please leave a like. If you aren't subscribed, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.